Hello, everyone, and welcome to Employer Perspective, our webinar series. And today's webinar is titled The Good Employer, Designing a Welcoming Workplace to Recruit and Retain Newcomer Talent. Employer Perspectives is brought to you by the Immigrant Employment Councils of Canada and New Canadians TV Network. And today's webinar specifically is in collaboration with the Workforce Collective. You can learn more about their work on their website, workforcecollective.ca. I'm Gerard Kelejan, your host for today's webinar, and I'm very delighted to welcome Vivian Kinnert, the strategy lead and CEO of the Workforce Collective, who will moderate today's discussion. Thank you, Vivian, for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
And it's an important topic, obviously, and everyone is looking forward to an insightful discussion. So over to you, Vivian.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jared, for the warm welcome. And it's a pleasure to be engaged with New Canadians TV on this initiative today. As Jared said, our topic today is the good employer, designing a welcoming workplace to recruit and retain newcomer talent. The good employer is something that we are very passionate about at Workforce Collective. We are a not-for-profit organization that work in partnership in Niagara and across Ontario and Canada on workforce-related topics and issues and challenges and opportunities. And the notion of the good employer is something that is very close to us. We're also very proud to represent our community as part of the Immigrant Employment Councils of Canada. I would just like to start by introducing our panelists today. So for this discussion, we have three experienced HR professionals. Kuda Behera is the Employment Link Recruitment and Training Specialist with the YMCA Niagara. He is an experienced HR professional, having worked in many locations internationally, and he is passionate about linking employers with job seekers and also advocating for an inclusive workforce. Melanie Neeps is the Workplace Relations Advisor at Niagara Health. Niagara Health is a very large employer here locally in Niagara, Ontario, an organization of more than 7,300 individuals in the health sector, all contributing to providing healthcare across the Niagara region, and obviously a very complex and diverse workforce. And finally, Alu McCabe is president and HR strategist at Trusted Time, which is a boutique human resources consulting company who works with businesses and many other kinds of organizations to support organizational growth through effective human resource strategies. So welcome to the panelists, and I really look forward to our conversation today. As just the way we're going to work today, as moderator, I have some questions that I'm going to ask panelists. I look forward to receiving any of your questions that you may have that you can put into the chat, and we will try to get to those. But the intention today is to be very conversational. And while I do have individual questions that I'll be asking some of the panelists, everyone will be encouraged to participate as fully as possible and get the conversation going. So Alu, I'm going to start with you. And let's start with the kind of obvious question. What does it mean to be a good employer?
Well, thank you for having me. So good employer changes time over time. You have the basics of what a good employer is, which I'll just list down on, in my opinion, what they are and what seems to be the standard sort of operating procedures to be called a good employer. But that changes year over year based on the environment. Are we looking at immigrants more? What type of influxes are there with the diversity of the population? How does our equity change based on that? But just to answer your question, I mean, a good employer obviously is someone that provides fair compensation and benefits. And I mean fair, that it's got to be sustainable to the business, but it's also got to be commensurate with the economics of the environment. a safe and healthy workplace. They give some form of a work-life type of balance. And I'm not necessarily talking about hybrid or working from home. That would be purely business dependent. But there'd be a clear separation between the work and working and being home, and doing your personal life. Um, but then there's these other components that make you a good employer, right? What are the opportunities for growth and development within the organization? What are the training opportunities? What are the recognition and appreciations? Is there open communication? Is it inclusive and diverse, which is so critical today because, Canada is a melting pot. And
Mhm.
that's the beauty about our countries. We can be one. So there's now an expectation where there wasn't before that workplaces are more inclusive and diverse, just because of the type of employees that are out there. Is there supposed supportive leadership? Do they have a wellness program? But now, again, as an added caveat to what a good employer is, do they have corporate social responsibility?
Mhm.
Are they community minded? What impact do they have in the community aside from hiring people, which is a quid pro quo? What impact do they have? And within all that, do they have a relationship with their employees that psychological contracts between the employee and the employer are in good stead? That employees are no longer having to work for a currency that doesn't resonate with them. Is the employer able to pivot to be more profitable and more productive, by putting well-being first? So, being a good employer, you have the basic of making sure you're paying a fair wage and it's safe, but then all these other components have to come into place depending on what your environment is.
Yeah, that's really kind of insightful comments. And from what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that being a good employer is, number one, very inclusive of a lot of management responsibilities and how employees are treated. As you say, it's not just necessarily good compensation, but there's a lot of other things there. But the other point that you make that maybe we could explore a little bit more is just how it's changing. You know,
Yep.
how being a good employer in one context or even at one time isn't necessarily um, where to stay. You can't just stay there because it evolves over time. Do you want to say anything a little bit more about that, or anybody else say a little bit more about how things are changing in the current labor market?
Well, the environment in itself is changing, right? We're seeing, just even the influx of the potential workers that are coming to the workplace, or even the experienced workers that are coming from different countries into the workplace. Um, let's call a spade a spade. The employer, yes, if they're hiring newcomers or if they're hiring people from varied backgrounds, there is some um, um, more pressure to be able to be more flexible in their training plans, because there is some investment to kind of, it's not only a cultural shift, right? But it's also training them on how the work is done here. However, in saying that, it's really a benefit to them to be able to understand what inclusivity means as far as different nations, different walks of life, etc. Because if that is your workforce, it is also a mirror of what your new clientele is like,
Mm, hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So yes, it's changing dramatically because we have an influx, like even with the students coming in, we have an influx of international students doing co-ops. We have an influx of immigrants coming into the country. We have an influx of a new generation coming into the workplace. But these same demographics are now going to be your future clientele demographics, whatever that looks like for you. So it's a win-win situation, understanding what it looks like in your backyard so you can service the same type of people outside.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm hearing also, you talk about um, having to pay attention to these things and put actions in place over time. And maybe that's a good segue to our follow-up question, which, Melanie, I'll ask you, why we're talking about good employers here. So why is it important for employers to take that action, to be good employers, particularly when it comes to recruiting and retaining newcomer talent?
Thank you so much, Vivian, and thank you so much for having me today. So as we've kind of already alluded to, the world is changing. It's a changing place. Being that we are a hospital, everyone can come to the hospital. So when we talk about who we serve and who we see on a day-to-day basis, it could be anyone, whether that be a newcomer, whether that be, a young person, an older person, and everyone in between. So at Niagara Health, as everyone else says, we've had to do a lot of, the keyword of pivoting. Recognizing that our demographic of employees have changed. We had a lot of retirement throughout COVID and beyond, a lot of new staff coming on board. And because of that, we have had to do a lot of assessing and evaluating of how are we training new staff coming into the hospital, because we have a lot of new nurses that are new out of school. We have internationally educated nurses, and we want to make sure that we have the resources available to support them to be successful, right? So a new nurse, whether they are coming from a different country or whether they are coming from school, has a very different background and experience to a, quote unquote, veteran nurse or someone who's been in the system for 20 or 30 years. And we're looking at lots of different ways to bridge that gap. So things like mentoring, things like providing coaching to those new people coming in so they feel supported. One of the things with our internationally educated nurses, they come with a vast experience from their own country. And so we're looking at ways to evaluate what skills they're bringing from their country that can then determine where their best placement within the hospital might lie. So there's a lot of work happening to recognize that for a staff need to be supported. So when Alu was going through the list of all the things of a good employer, I was thinking, yes, we have lots of those pieces, but it's that communication piece and explaining what does that mean and what does that look like when we talk about work-life balance and when we talk about coming into a hospital that is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week operation.
Yes. Well, as you were speaking there, I too was also thinking about what Alu was saying, kind of the checklist of things that you need to be on top of when you're a good employer. But then also, thinking of yourselves and a hospital environment. We're back to Alu's point too. It's the people who walk through your door looking for healthcare are the whole world. It's everyone, right? So you need to kind of represent in amongst the staff also the diversity of people that you're also serving in the health system. It's very interesting. What about, you mentioned there about being on top of the different experiences and qualifications and experience that people are bringing to the workplace. How could you talk a little bit more about how that you're working through that in the context of kind of competition for talent?
Absolutely. So again, it's an interesting world that we live in today. And we've been fortunate to do a lot of work within our diversity, equity, and inclusion portfolio at Niagara Health. And through that, partnering with community agencies and understanding, who is coming and who is in our community is very, very helpful. But in addition to that, from a training and orientation perspective, we really had to take a step back and look and see what resources that we're providing to our staff as they come into the hospital. And so we have a program that's specific to our internationally educated nurses called Building Bridges, which is an additional orientation day to go over kind of nuances, what might, things that might seem different, or, the different equipment that the nurses are going to perhaps be seeing, and giving them the extra time to take a look at that and talk about it. And from a human resources perspective, we are able to go in and talk to that group around the Niagara community, the resources that we have at Niagara Health to support from a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. So the different, our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, we have embraced a cultural humility approach at Niagara Health. Mm-hmm. And so we recognize that this is not a one-size-fits-all type of situation. We need to learn and grow together, right? So we are doing training and with all of our Niagara Health staff, helping them to see how the conversations and building connections and that interpersonal relationship plays such an impactful role on the success of the unit, of the flow of service, and at the end of the day, giving the best quality care to the patients. That's the thing with healthcare, right? So as our employees, we have to ensure that we're giving them the tools and the resources that they need so that we can better serve patients and get them well.
Yeah, I love that whole thought of learning together in order to be able to not just enable people to be successful in their work, but also learn from them and engage with it. Olivia,
Right.
you were going to say something there too,
Yeah,
because I had another question for you too.
Melanie, that it's great. It's great that we have, but these employers, but let's talk about the small businesses for a second that don't have these resources, right? Um, the part where we not struggle with, but that's more challenging is you have a small business and everybody's so busy in trying to grow this business, and then they're short staffed and they don't have enough skill, etc., etc. Where's their time for diversity and inclusive, right? Where is that time? So one of the things that we really should, be talking about is when we're saying what makes a good employer is really the intent to get there, because some of them just can't get there today. But there has to be a sort of an avenue for them to go to be able to get there. Most of my clients, they would utilize me to get there. They utilize my company to get there because, they don't necessarily have the capacity or knowledge, or quite frankly, in some cases, realize how important it is because they don't have that issue. But I do think there is some sort of a corporate social responsibility that has to happen even with the small businesses to investigate. And if they don't have the time to invest in that investigation.
Yeah. Where do they go for the help? Kind of could be. Yeah. Maybe that's a good segue over to you, Kuda. Maybe you could comment. You work with lots of small business employers as well in your work. So what are some of the common barriers or challenges that you see employers experiencing in building that kind of more welcoming and inclusive workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of barriers. Like obviously, Ali just mentioned, hey, we're a small business here. We're just trying to make things happen with the little resources that we have, and that's understandable. But at the same time, you have to be open to inviting expertise if you realize that you don't have the capacity probably to push some of these equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, like Elu said. But some of the barriers that we've noticed is whenever these initiatives for an inclusive environment are trying to be implemented, there seems to be like a lack of employee buy-in or a fear of being politically incorrect. So what do I mean when I say that? So basically, just feeling as if you're being attacked, automatically going towards the offensive, feeling that whenever these topics come about, it's all about attacking a certain group and taking away their advantages and making them more disadvantaged, or saying, "Oh, I can't say certain things in a workplace environment. I have to walk on eggshells, for example, or I can't mention this holiday, or I'll get in trouble, I'll get some sort of reprimand if I say the wrong thing towards someone who is, from a different culture." So the solution to this barrier, I would say, would be basically something that we do whenever we, as Employer Link, we try to, do a lot of equity, diversity, and inclusion workshops. We try to lower the temperature from the onset of having these conversations as much as possible, right? Make them aware that, we're not here to attack a certain group. We're not trying to, make someone feel defensive, and, so they have to feel like they protect themselves. But these conversations about emphasizing a mutual learning between each other, right? We're all different. Even individuals that are multi-generational Canadian, right? They have differences amongst each other. Doesn't automatically mean that, just because, you were born and raised in Canada, you're immediately going to have something in common with someone who has the exact same upbringing as yourself. For example, I'm from Zimbabwe, but I'm not representative of every Zimbabwean you're gonna meet, right? There are always going to be differences, but where can we come together, right? It's all about finding common ground. And for me, common ground as an employee in a workplace is obviously wanting the best interests for the company that you're working for, the organization you're a part of. Because if the company does well, that means you're going to have job security, and probably you're going to be more loyal, and you have that in common with someone that you would otherwise feel like you have differences with. So just a quote that I like, and it often comes up whenever equity, diversity, and inclusion conversations are had, is it's not about taking away from one group, right, and reallocating those resources to another, but it's about raising all groups, right? So all groups can be at somewhat of an equal playing field. So that's one barrier that I've noticed. Another one would be, a more obvious one, a language barrier. So obviously, we have seen an influx of individuals, newcomers that have found themselves in the Niagara region. A lot of them, they don't come from English-speaking countries, right? So, obviously, this is a big barrier, because if you can't communicate in the workplace setting, I don't know how easily you're going to find it to work or find employment. So at the YMCA, this is the solution, by the way. What we do on a daily basis, we meet a lot of job seekers. But first things first, we always encourage them that, hey, we're in Canada now. Like, we get that, you have a story, you came from somewhere, but at the same time, we're in Canada now. So we immediately assess their English, level. We do free language assessments to determine where they're at. So once we have an idea of where they're at, we're either going to refer them to, ESL, English as a second language classes, if needed, so that they can actively work on this. And another solution I would suggest is to practice active listening, right, with these newcomers that don't necessarily speak English. I'll give you an example of a retirement home that we've been working with as Employer Link. So they hired a couple of individuals from Ukraine last year to join their team, and they spoke basically like no English at all. But they had desire, they had heart. Their resumes look good, and they were eager to contribute to the organization as much as possible. So they gave them a shot. And then a year on, they told us that the English language is actually improved because they were forced to be customer facing and interact with Canadians on a daily basis. And so they picked up a couple of a couple of words, and now they can speak. And they're obviously taking those English as a second language classes on the side, just to kind of like help solidify their English. So I feel like that's a solution to that barrier of language that a lot of employers are like facing. And then another one I would say is the cultural miscommunication, right? So English is not a problem, let's just say, for this example, right? You can communicate effectively, but you're still from a different culture, right? So obviously there is always going to be potential for these misunderstandings based on just being from a different culture and just having different perspectives. And what comes with this is those unconscious biases. So these are, preconceived notions that we all have about each other, right? That we don't even realize that we have, but that's just how, the human brain is designed, right? We're designed to be comfortable with what we're familiar with, what we grew up around. And then the moment that there's something that, is different from, what our brain perceives as normal from, growing up, then, a problem arises, right? So the solution to this kind of barrier, I would say, is to encourage cautious curiosity, right? So this is just to, come from a good place with good intentions in mind to try to understand diverse customs and beliefs, right? Sharing personal experiences, to promote understanding, can help to create an inclusive environment. And, I'll give you an example of, a situation that I had a couple of months ago. So I had a client that came in and, she is a Muslim lady and she was looking for a job, right? And immediately when I first meet my clients, I usually just shake their hand, right? But she didn't shake my hand, and I didn't think too much of it at the time. I did notice it, but I didn't, think too much of it at the time because I just thought maybe she missed my cue that I was going to shake the hand. And then when we got into, the room so we could discuss her job aspirations, she was a very like high energy and fun person to have a conversation with, right? I really did enjoy my conversation. So any reservations I might have had about why she didn't want to shake my hand were like completely gone, right? But again, closing the loop, the conversation is over. I'm going again to shake the hand, and this time she doesn't. So this time I notice it, and I almost take offense, and I'm like, oh man, like why didn't she, shake my hand? And then I took that to offense because I started thinking about all these, like, my unconscious bias is starting to kick in, like, oh, maybe this is something to do with my race, or should I say something, or am I smell, all of these things that I'm thinking about. And then I had to slow down, right? And practice that cautious curiosity that I'm preaching. And I asked one of my Muslim colleagues, who was a lady as well, and I had no idea because I'm from a predominantly Christian country, that Muslim women don't shake hands of the opposite sex. So an explanation as simple as that, could have been taken the wrong way had I not taken the time to, like ask a question and slow down and not think everything is about me and be quick to be offended. So yeah, those are a couple of barriers that I feel like I've noticed, whenever employers are attempting to hire some newcomers.
Okay, thank you for that, Kuda. As I was listening to you, and you were describing, things that you've observed within your the small businesses, obviously, and small organizations that you work with, I did think that there was some resonance with some of the things that what Melanie was talking about, what they're doing at Niagara Health. And Melanie talked about kind of taking that learning together approach, and that what is it you called it, Melanie? The humility,
Cultural humility.
cultural humility. And I just thought, yeah, kind of back to Lou's point too. Larger organizations like Niagara Health, have got resources to be able to really dig deep into some of these kind of things in a very structured, organized way, which is great to hear. And I just, once again, I'd say I just love to hear what you're doing there, Melanie. But I also see parallels with what you were talking about there too, Kuda. Like there is barriers that that smaller companies have. And, again, back to Lou's earlier comment about intentionality, they see it. They may not know what to do with it, but through conversations like with yourselves at the YMCA or with others in the community or even agencies, they can almost engage with that cultural humility as well, in a different way. So maybe we are getting to, kind of similar endpoints, but taking very diverse paths for different employers to get there. I mean, it's just an observation I had while I was listening to you both. I don't know if anybody else heard that or wants to comment on that at all. Although I see you nodding, but I'm not sure.
There's nothing I disagree with, right? Like, I mean, he Kuda said something, coming from a Muslim country and women are, that actually happened to me, right? I mean, but I didn't know. No one told me anything. I extended my hand and I was so offended because the guy literally looks at me and says, I can't shake your hand. And I'm going, and I'll tell you where this happened. And a cruise ship with 63 other nations where I used to work. He wasn't staff member because he was staff, he'd get fired. However, he was the son of the hotel director and she let him do that. Now, there is that.
Yeah.
There is this collision that happens in the workplace. Um, and we put all the own. So I just want to say that I'm very respectful. Like, listen, I'm Indian. I grew up in the Philippines. I moved to Canada. I worked in the cruise ship. I don't know who the heck I am as far as nationality. I'm everybody, right? So I have this big respect. But within those, there are like boundaries we have to work within.
Yeah.
From an employer standpoint, right? But from an employee standpoint, people are like, oh, employers just want to Canadianize. That's not true, right? But there's a cultural behavior that's acceptable in public that is going to be the norm. And quite frankly, that has shifted dramatically, right? That has shifted dramatically. People are really more open to learning new things. In some cases, I would argue they're tolerant, but they still have to kind of go with that. But much to a lot of what Scoot is saying is right. There has to be a middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where we're lacking is we are giving everybody the opportunity, I feel, to come to the well. We're not telling them how to get the water from the well on both sides. And if we're doing it, we're so small in our efforts. To Melanie's great. That's her backyard. The resources are there. There's a dynamic culture that they can work with. But then we have the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
How do we work with those with one HR person or none?
Yeah. Okay, then I'll just I'm curious about everything that you're saying there too. But what about, well, how can leadership help then? How can leadership training, supervisors, team leads, even the CEO of a company or the senior management of a company in these smaller organizations that have good intent, as you say, they come to the well, they want to do good and be good, but they maybe don't have the capacity. They don't really know how, right? So what can be learned from, for example, leadership, or scholarship in leadership, or even just leadership in practice, and how to be a good leader? Does that resonate with trying to solve some of the good intentions?
Are you asking me? I'm not
Well,
sure.
I'm asking anybody, but yeah, Lou, I'll throw it back to you. Given your
so let me put it this way. When you're really young, your parents are your heroes. Then you grow up and you're like, oops, maybe not so much. And it's a different kind of relationship. I view leadership like that, right? Leaders have a lot to learn. Some are really learned, some not so much. But leaders are put in this pedestal like they know it all, right? But if the world's changing in this way and there's no learning happening here, then they stagnate. And if the world's moving forward, then they go lower and lower. And I think there has to be leadership plays a very, very big role in driving culture. Culture is not an HR problem. It is a leadership supervisor issue, really, because they're the ones who drive it. But if they themselves are not educated, they're driving what they believe. They're driving what they believe the culture should be, how people should behave, what they know or not. The ignorance is driven by them. Right? So, yeah, it starts at that level, but if they're not educated, you can certainly anticipate ignorance is what they're projecting.
Yeah. I guess until the costs of not being a good leader, or the costs of not being a good employer, come to fruition. For example, you cannot find the good staff, or recruit and retain the good
they don't stay.
You need. They don't stay, right? So that you end up having a bottom line cost. You end up having operational costs, or economic costs that which forces you to learn, right? And I guess I keep coming back to Niagara Health's larger project around this, which is how do we learn to be better, right? So
So on the
Now,
heels of that, I would just, with over 7,000 staff
yeah,
at Niagara Health, although we are a large organization and we do have some resources, we also have a large population to educate
Yes.
and connect with. So how do we do that? We do that starting with our leaders, right? Because it's a much smaller group versus 200 versus 7,000. So we focus on that group initially, and then we span that work out. And so as much as it may feel difficult with smaller organizations or smaller businesses, I understand and empathize with that, absolutely. But I look at Niagara Health as a whole bunch of small organizations in the sense of all the separate units, and they all have their own struggles. And we do have a healthcare employee crisis in terms of finding and hiring qualified individuals to do the roles that we have open at Niagara Health. So again, very full plates, and this is one piece of many things that are happening all at the same time. So just recognizing that it is it's a step-by-step approach. It cannot and will not happen overnight.
no,
We've had our diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist role at Niagara Health only for about 3 years. And, we're doing a lot of work, but we also see a long path ahead of us as well. And recognizing that small steps at the end of the day make a difference. So we're not expecting anyone to, change everything overnight. It's a really, step-by-step process.
yeah, I
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, go ahead,
Sorry.
Kuda.
Yeah, I was just gonna chime in. I definitely see both views from Alu and Melanie's standpoint. But I think at the end of the day, it really just comes down to employers just being humble enough to realize that they need to continuously be learning, right? I think continuous learning is a theme that's come up a couple of times already, and it's true. Just as an employer expects an employee to be constantly working on improving their knowledge on the job and new skill sets and ongoing, career development and training, so should be expected from a good employer, right? They should be learning as well, learning from their past successes and failures, right? Unlearning some things that they thought were, correct business practices, but now realize that, oh, okay, the world has changed. The world has changed, right? The workforce right now looks very differently from what it did 20 or 30 years ago. And if you're not, adjusting certain things in your control, then you're not being a good employer at the end of the day.
Yeah. That kind of leads into another point. Maybe you could comment on, Kuda. And we've kind of alluded to it a little bit here in some of the discussion, which is sometimes employers are they're a bit risk averse. They've got uncertainty, right? They want to hire, but they don't want to leap, right? And actually do the hiring. And a lot of hiring managers find themselves in that context. So what do you hear, Kuda, when you're talking to employers about what are they uncertain about, and what is the particular perceived risks of hiring, say, newcomer talent?
Yeah, great question. I'd like to start off assuming I think everyone on this panel has some sort of experience with human resources, and I think we can probably agree on the fact that hiring anybody, there's high risk when you hire anybody. There's a lot of costs that go into there, and let's be honest, an interview, you can never get someone's life story through interviewing them, even if you go 5 rounds with them, right? So just to start off there to set the bar. But obviously, when we're hiring a newcomer, a different kind of risk starts appearing because they're not from Canada, right? So an area that I see employers kind of show a lot of concern for is just the whole work authorization and immigration status uncertainty area, right? A lot of employers feel that if they go through the often strenuous and sometimes complicated process of doing a labor market impact assessment, right? That's a LMIA. And then they sponsor this individual from, I like Zimbabwe because that's where I'm from Zimbabwe. And then this person comes all the way here. And then let's say he works for a certain duration before he's allowed to apply for permanent residency status. Once he gets his permanent residency status, he's like, thank you, but no thank you, right? And then he leaves this employer who spent all this time and money investing in them, and now all of a sudden they have nothing to show for it. I get that. That I would be frustrated if I was in a position like that. But I feel like it all goes back to being a good employer, right? If we're doing all the things that we can that's in our capacity to make sure that the environment that, we're inviting these people to as newcomers are, supportive, they're going to foster loyalty. And even when they do get that permanent residency and ultimately citizenship, they're not going to want to up and leave on the first possible opportunity they get, because they understand that their employer is a good employer, and the employer is taking the time to invest in them and to change the environment so that it's more conducive for them to be successful, right? So that's one barrier that I've noticed. A lot of employers often express that. When it comes to another one would be international experience and training is being overlooked, right? So a lot of employers reject newcomers just because of the fact that, they do have work experience, but it's not Canadian experience, right? So, even just saying that sentence, it doesn't feel right. So I'm saying that I've done a job in a different part of the world, but because I haven't done that job in Canada, it's my experience doesn't count, right? So I feel a solution to this, and I feel it's a conversation that's already started being had, by government, is that, okay, so they may have not worked here in Canada before, but a lot of these skills are transferable, right? Sort of just to allude to some of the stuff Melanie was saying about how, a lot of the individuals, come, to Canada, and they already have a wealth of experience under their belt from, different countries. So I feel like there should be more of a focus on making sure that these skills are on highlighting the fact that these skills can be transferable, right? And for jobs that are more practical, let's just say production work, for example, or construction, what about working interviews, right? Okay, they don't have any experience in Canada, but they say they did this stuff, in different parts of the world. Why not? Let's see them in action, right? Let's see their hands-on experience. Let's see, them do tours, and see what they can actually do and contribute to. The company should be hire them, right? So I feel like we're kind of leaning towards, as a country, is that Canadian experience is not the standard, right? And I love that the government is looking at ways to get rid of some of that thinking that employers, still have. Goes back to unlearning, and learning new things, that it's not always just about Canadian experience. Now I understand I have to put a disclaimer every time I say something like that, because I do understand that some industries are regulated, right? For example, civil engineers, electrical engineers, doctors, and so forth, right? I understand that you have to undergo some sort of training and education in Canada before you're able to practice. But not all jobs are that way. And then as far as not recognizing international qualifications, there are credential evaluation companies that are renowned, like WES, that can help you show that, hey, a bachelor's degree in commerce or a master's in commerce in a different country is the exact same, or if it's not the exact same, this is what it's equivalent to, and this is what they need to do for them to get to that point. And at the YMCA, our team, known as ACE, Accelerated Career Exploration, will be happy to help newcomers if they need to go about this credential evaluation process. So yeah, those are some of the the things that I've noticed.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, just listening to you, what's really evident is that in employers, whether they're large employers or small employers, they all have learned certain things, and that they maybe need to relearn. But what's clear is there's a lot of resources in the community for people to tap into, and for employers in particular to say, hey, can someone help me with this, right? And even if they're quite small and don't have capacity, they're, at the YMCA and in other organizations, and also in, consultants and HR practitioners.
Yep.
There's always help there. So I think I love, this theme is running through this entire conversation around the opportunity to learn from others. To make the organizations bigger and better, and pay attention to the way in which the workforce is changing. As a follow-up from that, Lou, can you think of, 2 or 3 things or 2 or 3 steps that employers could take just to create that more welcoming environment?
I guess the first one is get yourself educated,
Mhm.
right? Understand what your landscape is. To create some sort of, a well-being program around your employees, and that might look different depending on the demographics of what you have. And the third is understand the currency that matters to that employee, right? I think
Mhm.
that's critical. For some people, it's money. For some people, it's time. For some people, it's time to pray, right? Everybody has a different currency that's of value to them. But if you're really going to say, hey, I'm prepared to be an inclusive workplace and I understand that these are the demographics and I want to play a part in the community, you would be willing to take your steps. But the number one, Viv, in my opinion, is people have got to want to learn.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And again, another theme that's running right through today. What about you, Melanie? Is there any what's the experience of NHS in terms of just that, those 2 or 3 things that you're doing?
For sure. So definitely, when you look at our strategic plan, our focus, one of our main focuses is around workplace culture. And really, what does that mean? Because it's not a tangible, this is what it is, because it's definitely not the same for everyone. So having something that is, fits the needs of what individuals want rather than a one size fits all kind of solution, right? So really fostering that type of environment. One of the things that we really focus on at Niagara Health is our communications with one another. And it's almost as though we are doing kind of a relearn, a reset in terms of remembering that we need to have a conversation with others rather than starting in a confrontational type atmosphere, right? So we always say our expectation is respectful interactions, professional and respectful interactions at all times, right? So sometimes it just requires a conversation and a reset to get back there. So many new things, new challenges, new opportunities are coming at everyone. And so looking for ways to ensure that we're communicating effectively with one another, because at the end of the day, how the message is sent makes a huge impact, right? With so much information and so many changes, we're trying to really look at that reset and that focus on that cultural piece that, or when I say workplace culture, I mean overall for everyone. And as Alou said, it's different depending on who is your employee. But at Niagara Health, we have employees from new grads all the way to retirees or close to retirement. And so everyone's needs are very different.
Right. That's right. I saw you nodding there, Alou, on that about the workplace culture piece. Is there anything you wanted to expand on there?
Well, I mean, anybody who knows me and knows what I do, that you have to align the HR strategy with the business strategy. Like, it is so important. The culture is the DNA of an organization, right? It is what you're going to live by as an organization. And if your employees are completely bought into that culture, and it's attached to the organization, that's half your battle with achieving your strategies. So when people are doing strategic plans, if culture's in the foreground of it, it becomes magic, right? Because it really propels the business strategy. And just to point out, kudos to Niagara Health for looking at it that way. Honestly, because most businesses, that is precisely what I'm talking about. They need to learn that. They don't understand how to do that. And then 10 years later, they look and they're like, we were so great. What happened to us? Well, you were left behind.
Yes,
You
yes.
were left behind because you didn't shift and make your culture align with what is happening in the environment today.
Yeah, yeah. And that kind of goes back to Kuda's earlier comment around, when employers are worried about the risks they need to take in kind of stepping out of their comfort zone and hiring people that they maybe are not used to hiring, and they're a bit risk averse around it. Because I think Kuda, your example there was, well, I'm going to go to all this effort to bring someone in, and as soon as they get their PR, they're going to leave me, right? And that is totally forgetting that to be a good employer, you're working on all these other things too. So that person will never want to leave it, right? So, I mean, it works for, not only recruiting and retaining newcomer talent, but I would argue it works for every single organization with every single employee they've got to operate like that. And then you will not have a retention issue.
Yeah, but let's be clear, it's dollars and cents, right? Where at the end of the day, you run a business for dollars and cents. But the dollars and cents become more prominent, if you will, without pain, if you're actually aligning with the environmental culture around you. It's just the way it is. And you'll find that in the 1800s and very, very early 19s, where the unions started happening, etc., there was a very big disalignment between how businesses were run and what environment was saying as respect for people. We're in that crucial spot again today, right? The environment is saying, hey, businesses, we have about 60 nations around us. This is now your new mode of operation. A business is going, this is, these people, literally, these people are not who I want. Well, now you're left behind because that is your workforce right there, and that is the same clients you have right there, right? So you have to change your culture, not as a culture of tolerance, but a culture of inclusivity, because primarily that is what will keep the people there. Your tolerance will bring them in. Your inclusivity will retain them, and create career pathing. Huge difference.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've only got a few more minutes left, but I just wanted to address, some of the initiatives that are going on here in Niagara. And Kuda, I'll just turn to you. Here in the Niagara region, and we've Workforce Collective have been partnered with the YMCA on this. We've run a program called Employer Link, and Link does stand for Learning, Information, and Network Knowledge. So there's that word learning again. And it's been successful in supporting both job seekers, newcomer job seekers, and employers. So Kuda, just in a couple of minutes, could you kind of share a little bit more about this initiative and its impact?
Yeah, absolutely. Just like Vivian alluded to, it is provided by Workforce Collective and the YMCA, and Workforce Collective is actually the funder and basically the driving force behind it. And as YMCA, we just help to implement it. Basically, like the name suggests, Employer Link, it's designed to bridge the gap that exists between internationally trained individuals and employers in the local, Niagara region. So a lot of these newcomers that we've alluded to earlier in this conversation that are in the Niagara region are finding it really hard to join the workforce in a capacity that is truly meaningful. That is, having their skill sets used by employers, right? As a result, they end up working survival jobs or entry-level jobs that are only short term because they can't find the opportunities that they're qualified for. So as Employer Link, we try to address this and to improve on this disconnect between the job seekers and employers by addressing unemployment and underemployment directly. So we're working with a lot of these internationally trained persons on a daily basis to help them on their job applications as well as resume building, and educate them as well on what it looks like to work in a Canadian work setting. So as of today, we have successfully managed through the Employer Link initiative. We've supported 45 clients to be hired through the Employer Link initiative, which started about 2 years ago. And out of these 45, 41 of these clients have had positions that are directly related to their career goals. So that's more off on the client side of things, more specifically on what Employer Link is doing with the employers is we're collaborating with them. Obviously, we're helping them to recruit these new Canadians, and whenever they've been hired, we offer workshops so we can kind of educate them on equity, diversity, and inclusion whenever possible. And actually, a good example of a collaboration that we've done is actually someone representing them on this panel, which is Melanie, Niagara Health. We did host a successful workshop, I believe it was sometime last year, which resulted in the hiring of medical professionals. So that just demonstrates the commitment that we have to bridging the gap between employers and newcomers through some of these initiatives. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Melanie, I don't know if you wanted to comment on, Kuda mentioned it there. Any comment you've got on the experience of Niagara Health with that program in particular?
Sure. So I would just say that is something that Niagara Health is doing differently in terms of our recruitment, right? So building, accessing, and utilizing those community connections is pivotal. We are in a unique environment when it comes to medical professionals in general, and so it became imperative to change the way in which we recruit. And so one of those things was to come out to community organizations, speak to people who are interested in whether they want to start anew or whether they want to transfer previous experience, and how do we do that? How do we make that work? So we did have a great opportunity. We did present to a group at the YMCA Newcomer Employment Services, and then we also did hold a tour at the hospital of a specific department, and then we were able to hire from that overall interaction. So it is pivotal to build those relationships, I guess, is my message for today.
Yeah, that's a great message, and it segues nicely into kind of some final comments around. It is about what resources are available, in community. So Lou, what would be your top 3 resources and supports that you see out there to support and help employers?
Well, for sure, the YMCA and their programs when it comes to newcomer citizenship. I mean, I know firsthand what they deliver, and I think that it's definitely a resource available. The second thing is, the training resources that are available. Like my company gives training out just on these topics alone, but it's really an education for a supervisory level before they get into that senior leadership. The frontline supervisory level is where I find that they could benefit from that part of the education. And third is really being able to connect with different community groups that are out there that support local communities, because within that alone they have like a multitude of education pieces and also employment opportunities for some of those youth that are coming, like newcomers and barrier youth that don't get the opportunities, like City Kids and different organizations like that. So those are the places that employers should tap into. And of course, your co-ops and the student level, because now those landscapes are different as well.
Yes, they are. Well, I think we could probably go on all day because there's a lot to uncover on this topic, but we're coming to the end of our time here. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank Alu, Kuda, Melanie. Thank you so much for your insightful comments today. Conversation is to be continued. Grateful to work with all of you in our community, and I'm going to hand it back to Gerard.
Thank you, Vivian, and thank you all the panelists, Lou, Melanie, and Huda, for sharing your thoughts, your experiences, and your insights about this topic. Thank you also for our attendees who joined us from different parts of Canada here on Zoom, and also some followed the discussion on our YouTube channel. So this was the end of the Good Employer webinar, Designing a Welcoming Workplace to Recruit and Retain Newcomer Talent. And it was brought to you in collaboration with the Workforce Collective. The series is called Employer Perspectives, and we regularly organize such discussions. And those discussions are brought to you, the series actually is brought to you by the Immigrant Employment Councils of Canada and the New Canadians TV network. To stay in touch with the New Canadians so that you are aware of similar events and discussions in the future, please get in touch through our platforms. In Canada and overseas, you can watch our programming through our weekly TV show, our YouTube channel, and our website. And to know about the events as I was talking, you can join our mailing list or follow us on one of our social media channels. Thank you once again to everyone, and see you in a new discussion soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.